think we kind of gave you the overview, but ultimately, this whole sort of idea of helping the consumer sort of got started about 12 months ago. I'm part of a small business. We were out in California. We had to find space for our company. We had 4 employees, and it was challenging. I got online and Googled. We were in Irvine, California. I Googled Irvine office space and found endless listings. There's probably 10,000 listings in different spaces that could have fit what we were looking for. I saw a bunch of numbers that didn't mean a lot. I'm a math kind of geek, and so I'm a CPA, so usually numbers are what I feel comfortable with, and there were just all these numbers, all these definitions. They were all fairly confusing. I didn't really know what we should be looking for, what the pitfalls were. I've always heard there are a lot of rocks in the river and there's things to avoid, and I knew that we were signing a long-term lease, which was important for our business. It was going to be our second biggest cost behind salaries, and I felt a little uncomfortable kind of talking to these landlords directly, because I got the sense that they were trying to pressure me into doing things, and I didn't really understand what I was doing. So I called a lot of waking hours in that office, and it's an expensive place. So you want to make sure that you find space that fits your personality and somewhere you want to be, and at the right price. So it's kind of how we got started. And our whole thing that's sort of important about traditional office space that people don't really realize is that there's a lot of steps in terms of getting that traditional space. You have to start looking for it, finding it, and then once you find it, traditional space usually takes what they call a tenant improvement build. You might get lease concessions, so you might have to go in there and knock down some walls, rearrange things. You generally have a space planner come in, or a contractor to help you build out the space, and these are all timing triggers and mechanisms. So a lot of people don't realize is that lease space, and they'll actually go sign a lease, and then they'll have all these professionals come in to help them, and then they'll realize, well, now I've signed a lease, but I'm not going to be done for another 6 weeks. Now I'm paying 6 weeks worth of costs. But if I had known up front what the right timing was to go through with all these other professionals, I could have saved myself some time and energy. So it's pretty important to know everything that goes into traditional office space. And it can be a very complicated, process that most people don't understand. And then the second thing would be that it's even more important when you're executing a lease to have that right professional on your side, because there are a lot of lease clauses in there. And there's a lot of things that are not just come down to price per square foot. Lease clauses are super important, and if you don't know what you're signing, the problem can be that you might think you have a great lease for 3 months, and then that 4th month comes in and that landlord's feeling the heat. So then he starts squeezing you on those clauses, and that's what causes a lot of the friction that exists between landlords and their tenants, which most people have some sort of story about. And not everyone kind of recognizes the challenge. So you don't want a landlord who doesn't know what they're doing, because that could be very challenging, which is another reason that the right professional or the right people can help you find that, because if a landlord's notorious for whatever, name X, the community generally knows about it, right? People know that this guy's hard to deal with, or he turns off the AC after 6 o'clock or whatever. And so you can go in blind, and he seems like a great guy and you want to do business with him, but without that sort of reference to the rest of the community knowing, you can really get yourself in a pickle if you have a bad landlord. And generally, if you have a bad landlord, there are legal avenues to get out of that, but it's certainly a pain. And sort of one of the themes of commercial real estate is if you do a little bit of work up front, you're going to save a ton of pain down the road. But not only is it ideal to have a professional who knows not only the type of space and location, but location is very important, but type is even more important. So you don't want a guy who deals with office space to help you find retail space, because it's just very different. The space you pick in a retail business can really make or break what you're doing ultimately. Now, it was replaced by MyFitFoods. I think it's right before Westcott. But anyhow, they were in there for about 12 months, and every time you went there it was pretty crowded, but they ultimately left the space because they couldn't make money. MyFitFoods went in there, and they're making a ton of money. And it's because of the parking situation and the time it took to eat lunch, they couldn't get enough volume in there in an hour time frame to make enough money on their margins. Whereas MyFitFoods, that people drive in every 5 minutes, pick up food and leave. So that business made sense for them in that parking spot, whereas Texadelphia's did not. And those are things that, Texadelphia is a pretty big franchise with a lot of locations, so if they can make that mistake, anyone can make that mistake. But it just highlights how important location is and parking is to retail space, and just one of the many things that make retail, obviously an office space.
And because it's difficult, and there are so many factors that go into picking location, what a retail tenant broker can provide somebody looking for space are things like area demographics, traffic count, things that have to be considered before a retail tenant signs a lease. And
there's different sort of negotiation points. You walk into a retail landlord directly to get a space, they're going to tell you that they can't put your name on a marquee, and if they do, they're going to charge you for it. Well, that's just a negotiation point. Having your name on a marquee is a huge deal. And so there are those types of little triggers that come into retail that having someone on your side who understands the market can really help you. Now, you may have no chance of getting your name on a marquee in a particular location. It'd be nice, if you know that's the case, then it's nice to know that going up front, because maybe that takes them out of the game. You're not going to waste your time negotiating something you're never going to get. And it's just,
John, it's a massive, commercial real estate is a massive industry with a ton of jargon. It's not just about leasing. Obviously, it's about buying and selling.
Most of the time, there's going to be a landlord broker. We call it either a listing agent or a landlord broker. They're the person on the sign that you call if you see a building. They're the person that you call on the online listing. They have, like we said, a legal and financial obligation to represent the landlord. They have a fiduciary duty to make sure they get them the best deal. And so tenants need to understand that when they're talking to a listing agent or a landlord rep, that person has a legal obligation to make sure they're representing the landlord. And that's a challenging relationship to have if you're dealing with them one-on-one. They obviously know their building, they know their market, and that's what they do on a daily basis. So it is very challenging to come in and think you're going to best them in terms of what type of deal you're going to get. And then obviously is the tenant broker. But ultimately, when it comes down to not only the leverage you're going to get by having a representation, but the leverage you're going to get when it comes to making sure the lease clauses you sign are accurate and appropriate, it's going to get paid in spades. And there are case studies that represent this. A good look for it. How would you know the difference? It's one word in a 400-page lease. Do the search themselves, and it's a good place to start as online listings. But ultimately, some of those listings are stale, or landlords will try to bait and switch you. Or we've all been to a house or an apartment where it looked really cool on the online photos, and we got there and it was not at all what we expected. Generally, the broker knows that area, so he knows what spaces are available. He knows what spaces are good. He knows which landlords are easy to work with. You don't know that by just looking at an online listing.
Now, when he says bait and switch, calling signs in a building, which we kind of have already covered, is you're essentially giving up your leverage. And another very basic anecdote that I have from the industry is when I used to represent a landlord as a leasing agent, people would call the sign. It's just not enough. It's a good kind of teaser for you to get an idea of what's out there and what some kind of very basic rental rates are and what some amenities are, but that's just the very, very first step.